Hello, welcome to Basins and Beer with ESA Analytics. I'm Blue Spikes. Today I'm going to talk to you about spacing in the DJ Basin. This is a follow-up to a video I made yesterday on the last 125 years of drilling in the DJ Basin and how things have changed. The beer I'm going to drink today is called Easy Street Wheat. It's from Odell Brewing, which is a Colorado brewery, so let's give that a taste. That is a really good beer. So it's a wheat, which I really like, and this is a very good one. All right, well, let's get into the DJ Basin. So first thing you're gonna do is load it up. It takes about 5 to 10 seconds to load, depending on your bandwidth. That's really fast for 110,000 wells. So load up the map. You have these dots. Let's start by coloring by well neighbors. A lot of times I start with formation. In this case, we're going to talk about well spacing and well density. And so the first thing you have to know is how many neighbors does each well have? And so that's what this map shows. And so I want to show you first and foremost, what does that mean? What is a well neighbor? So turn on the surveys. You drill in. And so if I'm looking at this well, for example, the neighbors are any well that surrounds it. So within a mile is what actually we look at more like a mile and a half. We find every well within a mile and a half of our reference well. And then we do that for every well in the basin. By doing that, we can whittle it down so that when it's time to actually calculate the spacing, we have a smaller subset of wells. So you have to start by finding the neighbors. And so I'm going to open the table, and I'm going to look for this well, so it's already jumped to that well. If I mouse over this is the well I moused over. If I focus on that well, what it's going to do is it's going to find all of the neighbor wells to display for me. Now, these neighbor wells have already been identified in the system, but for purposes of looking at a subsurface map, this is what it looks like. So this is how we visualize the neighbors that we've identified. And this one has a lot of neighbors, so it does take a few seconds to generate the 3D map, but this is what the 3D map looks like. I mean, that's pretty incredible that it loads that fast. It finds the wells. You don't have to select them. I mean, you can select wells and focus on wells in a particular plot, but for the subsurface, this is really ideal. So the other thing you see here is the gun barrel looks really cool, and so does our view from the side of this well. So I can tell you that's really a very nice set of grids surrounding that wellbore. And the gun barrel also looks great, but because we have so many wells going different directions, it looks a little messy. So what we do to really drill down on a well to figure out the spacing is we limit the neighbors so that you're only looking at the neighbors directly next door. So instead of finding all the wells within a radius, now we whittle it down to just the neighbors next door. And so that's how we go from finding neighbors to well spacing. So let's not spend a whole lot of time on the subsurface plot. I think it's important to show that, but it's also kind of fun to look at, so we can get lost in that, I think, for a long time. Let's instead switch to well spacing. So the well spacing is how far are the wells apart? And you measure this in feet, and a typical well spacing in a basin is, in this 400 range or 600 or 800 feet. So that's how far apart the wells are typically. And you can see it looks rather homogeneous, where all of the wells appear to be kind of the same color. So I want to show you how to filter down so that you don't have to utilize this full spectrum of color based on all of the available wells. So we want to drill down to just the wells that are in sort of the 0 to 2,500 foot range in terms of spacing. And really what we're doing is we're trying to drill down in a way that's going to help us find a better pattern. Because right now it's all blue, and that's just not going to be too revealing. So I'm going to drill down to a producing length in this 1 mile range, so 4,000 to 6,000 foot producing interval. And I want the well spacing to be in the 0, well, let's call it 1. We don't need the zeros. And up to 2,500. So that's going to give us a much better looking map. So I'm going to close that while it, so I can filter. And so now I've filtered in the table, but now I need to send that filter data to all of the other plots. So I hit the filter by table. This is going to take a few seconds because this is a lot of data. You're talking about millions of rows of production data, millions of rows of survey data, because we're looking at everything right now. So this will take a few seconds. So I'm going to enjoy another sip of this beer. That really is very good. So for people who are a little impatient, I can tell you, you don't want to get click happy. You want to let the application work and do the filtering, and you're going to be a lot happier with the result. If you start getting click happy, you can crash it. This is an online application, so you can crash it. You can run into memory errors. So you just let it work, and it's going to do what you want. So now we've got well spacing drilled down to a more reasonable subset, and now the colors are a little bit more revealing. So you can see by filtering down to that subset, I've applied the color range to a narrower range of wells, which gives me a better distribution of color and really brings out some patterns. So the sort of thing you can do at this point, if I want to select some wells and look at production, I can do that. It might be interesting to look at something like this. Let's look at that area, and then because I've got them selected, I can look at a production graph. And this production graph is interesting because now these blue wells haven't been producing as long, and they are in the tighter spacing window. So they're in this 100 to 300 feet apart, but they're newer. So it's a little bit of an unfair comparison, whereas these wells that are a little further apart in this 500 to 600 foot range, they're showing better production. But again, part of that is because they've been producing for longer, but this is plotted on, by day, so they really are just producing better. And that's something you'll know by the end of this talk is common. Wells that are more widely spaced tend to produce better than wells that are tightly spaced. And so this is the sort of thing, you can just go around the basin lassoing wells and looking at production, and most of the time you're going to see this relationship. Now, sometimes you'll find a subset of wells that sort of defies this general notion, but maybe it's better rock, maybe they had different completions. Who knows exactly why? Maybe it's a parent-child situation. So there's usually something to explain why you would see the inverse of this relationship. But most of the time, this is what you're going to see, and this is sort of common knowledge, and people understand when they are developing a basin, you're trying to figure out what is the ideal spacing. Is it 6? Is it 12? Is it 18? Is it 30? And you'll see in these basins this wide range. And that's what you see here. So these really widely spaced wells, you're not going to do that, because if you do that, you're leaving too much oil in the ground. And then if you're too tightly spaced, you're getting less oil per foot, and so your economics for each well really start to decline. let me actually show you. It might be an interesting graph. So this is looking at the production by date. So you can see how it starts off high and it declines. Because these started so far apart, it's a little bit hard to tell, but I can see that these wells decline more slowly. These wells decline more quickly, and these were the tighter wells. So again, that's what you expect. So let's get into, let me close this production graph, and I'm going to close the map just to make sure this is happy here. And I'm going to switch to well density. So well density is wells per section. So now we're taking our spacing measurements and we're normalizing that across a 1 mile section. And so this is really kind of the standard way to look at this type of data. And this is, I think you'll really start to see patterns in here. I got to turn on the surveys again. And it's just very interesting to see how these different operators drill these wells. And you can see it's not regional. You have some really wide, or I guess these are very tightly spaced wells, these red ones, and then you have the because now we're looking at well density. So this is 35 wells per section, and then you have some out here where it's just one well all by itself. But it's not like everybody in this area does it one way. You have a nice distribution across the basin. So you can look at how these different operators do things, and you can decide in this area, if I'm going to drill some infill wells, what should my spacing be? And you can use these other pads that have already been drilled with production in our application as an analog. So let me change a few menus here just to get things set up. I want to color by oil. I want to change this scatter plot so that it is oil on this axis. I want it to be well density on this axis. The bar graph I want to be oil on this bottom axis. And so I've got it colored and sized. Okay, I think that's the right settings to drill down on what I want to show next. All right, so yeah, that's looking a little better. Sorry, sometimes these plots are a little hard to get organized exactly the way you want them. All right, so this is a good chance to sort of show a real strength of this application. So we can now normalize by length, because looking at oil per foot is a very key way to look at this type of well, or this type of production data. And again, I think we need to figure out how to automatically scale this, but eventually I'll get down to a reasonable zoom level. Okay, so now that really starts to show what I wanted to show here, which is as your well density increases, your oil production per foot drops. And so by simply having all this data, automatically determining all these variables, and sort of knowing how to set these menus and how to drill down on this data, you can arrive at a conclusion that is quick and accurate, and you can know exactly what you should do. And again, you would want to go in here and look at a specific area where you plan to drill, but you can figure out pretty quickly what your ideal spacing is going to be. So in this case, we have, so again, because this menu is, or this axis is now oil per foot. This is your well density. This is oil per foot. This is well density. And this is colored by oil, and this is, colored by well density and sized by oil. So that's the basics, and then we've normalized by length, so that's what you're looking at. And so by drilling down like this, I can see that the most ideal spacing in terms of oil per foot is in this range of, I don't know, what is that, 11 to sort of 18. I mean, that's your ideal range, and specifically 14. That's pretty ideal. That's quick, that's easy. If you look up other people's estimates, some will say it's 12. I've seen it stated that 18. So this is the normal range that people are thinking. And I think that's really based on where you're drilling. So in some areas it would be higher, in some areas it would be lower. But as a general idea, something in this sort of 14 range is going to give you the most oil per foot. And then you're going to look at other reservoir characteristics and you're going to wonder, all right, well, yeah, maybe we get the most oil per foot, but how much oil are we leaving in the ground? And so you may push that number, or that well spacing, or sorry, the well density, you may push that up just to make sure you're getting as much of the oil out as possible, because you're maybe not focused purely on oil per foot, but you want to make sure you're depleting the reservoir. So, you're going to push that to the high side, but you don't want to get all the way up here, is the gist of what I'm trying to teach you here. So anyway, that's how it works in this application. That's how you drill down on this type of information. That's how quick and easy it is. The data's all here. It's ready to use. All it needs is you. So till next time, cheers.